Hi everybody, this is Michael Palotas and welcome to Test Tribe. Thanks for having me here and thanks to the organizers for putting together this wonderful conference. Application testing at scale in the enterprise world and the top 5 things to consider, that's what I want to talk about over the next 15 minutes. Just a real quick word about myself. Again, Michael Palotas, co-founder and VP of product at Element34. I'm based out of beautiful Switzerland. I've been in the testing space for more than 20 years, worked as a developer, worked as a tester. I ran eBay's quality engineering group for more than 10 years. And one of the more notable things probably that came out of there was, at least for the public, was the development and the open sourcing of Selenium Grid. And Selenium Grid then became part of the Selenium project. And now I'm sure many of you have come across it or used it. Let's ask ourselves the question, why do we test? And there's many reasons to test. You can say, oh, to prevent bugs, to speed up the development, to reduce cost. Ultimately, what I like to think about is we test to delight our customers. This is something that I took away from my time at eBay. There it was always about delighting our customers. And also with Element34, this is what we're trying to do every day. Because what I found is if you delight your customers, if you are happy customers, you as a company will very likely do well too. Now let's look at the top 5 things from our perspective to consider when you're taking testing from a smaller setup maybe into a large-scale setup, or when you go from a small company to an enterprise setting. So basically, what are the things that you really need to think about when you're looking at enterprise testing? So, and those 5 things are scale, test environments, test data, your tooling, your entire tool chain, and last but not least, continuous integration. Let's start with scale. When we talk about scale, many people think, oh, it's the number of people that are using an application. And if it's a lot, then it's a large-scale application. Of course, that's true, but there's many underlying aspects as well that come with scale. For example, the technologies that are used in order to put the entire application together. Programming languages, databases, number of databases, the number of servers, the deployment model. Are you running in a single cloud environment, in a multi-cloud environment, maybe everything on-prem? All those kind of things attribute to the scale. And what I've always found, what helped me and my teams doing a better job in testing is when you, number one, of course, understand what your product does, what your application is supposed to do, but also under the hood, how it works. What are the different pieces? How are they connected together? What's where? How do they interact with each other? And once you understand that, you will probably have a different approach to how you test that application, and you can go down paths that you would probably never go down if you actually didn't know how the application works. So understanding what your application does and how it works, I find that super, super helpful, and spend some time on it to acquire that know-how. Number 2, test environments. Probably one of the biggest pain points in any company. And what I mean by test environment is, as a developer, you build your application locally, you do some testing, but ultimately what you will do is you will take it, deploy it somewhere for, maybe to integrate it with some other pieces or other people to test it. And what I find is that in many companies, those test environments are vastly different from what the production environment looks like. And that could be completely different servers, completely underpowered servers. Maybe some companies are using their old laptops or their old servers to use it as a test environment. I've seen much better results when the test environments are as close as possible to the production environment. When you have the same servers, it's in the same server infrastructure, you're using, of course, the same technologies. Now, I'm sure now many people say, oh well, but with Docker all of this is solved. absolutely, Docker has solved a massive amount of problems that we had before, because now you can put things into a container and kind of lift and shift it around to different environments. So that's a wonderful thing. But still, you still have aspects like networks, certificates, firewalls, all those kind of things. And if all that is different from between your test environment and your production environment, you will very likely get different kind of results. Okay, the next aspect is test data. Again, another huge pain point for most companies, and probably the single biggest contributor to failed test automation and test projects in general. So test data is especially important when we look at automation, the automation aspect, because there you have to have absolutely repeatable tests, and you need to know at any time what data you're working with. Of course, everybody is trying to work with synthetic data, generate the data on the fly, and that's, if you can do that, by all means, that's probably the best approach and will give you the good results. But at the end of the day, using real or realistic data is also very important. And what we're seeing, for example, with the onset of AI, we're hearing from many customers that the only way to train the AI models is by actually using real data or realistic data. And so that kind of, so you have a place for synthetic data, but also for real and realistic data. Now, one caveat with using real data, or one thing that you need to think about, is real data mutates over time. Let's take me, for example. I like to buy electronics at an online store here in Switzerland, and over the last 10 years or so, I've gone from somebody who has never bought anything to a power user, if you want to call it that. So I probably see different things on the website when I go there than maybe somebody who has never bought anything. And you need to factor that into your tests. If you're using my account to run your tests and you're using production data, and maybe you're making a copy of the production database every month or every week, I don't know, my data will change, and how the application works or behaves will also change along with that. So you need to factor that into your tests. So just one thing to really keep thinking about. So point here is, make sure that you understand your test data. Don't just use a user, know which user you have. And this especially becomes important when you are also looking later on, we're talking about running tests in parallel, right? Not to use the same test data in different tests and then they kind of override each other. Yeah, so make sure you understand what data you're using or how you're generating it. Tooling. I always say I like automation, but automate what makes sense. Don't make a science project out of it, right? Look at what is useful to automate. There's always a case for certain things to be tested manually, things that you cannot automate, or things that would take an incredible amount of time to automate. So don't make a science project out of it. And most specifically, pick your tools for automation wisely. Don't just read a blog post over the weekend and then Monday morning you come to work or you tell your team, okay, I found this new tool, let's put it into our enterprise environment. Do some checks on the tools. Make sure that when you're using open source tools, check how many contributors there are. Check how active the project is. You don't want to end up with a project that is no longer maintained. Look who's behind the project. Open source, again, very easy. If you're using a commercial tool, make sure you understand who is behind it and the viability of that company. We've seen just lately a lot of talk around Cypress going away maybe, or Cypress not going away. I don't know, but there's a lot of rumors. It seems that there will be some changes there. Now, of course, a lot of people have invested heavily into Cypress, brought that in, and there's a lot of uncertainty right now. And you don't want to be in a position where, you know, you can't focus on testing anymore, but you have to switch out your entire test automation tool stack. Another thing is, keep in mind that when you pick your tools, that you want to have the ability to run across different browsers. A lot of the tools that are out there or that are coming out, they're only focusing on Chrome, for example, or Chromium. The reality is people, of course, a lot of people are using Chrome, but there's still also a lot of other browsers out there. And you want to make sure you have the ability to test also with those browsers, with different versions, etc. Parallelism, another very important factor. Make sure that the tools that you pick have the ability to run your tests in parallel. Of course, when you start out, you will most likely just write one test after another and then execute them in sequence, but you will hit the point in time when it will take too long to run those tests, and you will look at running them in parallel. And you absolutely want to make sure that, number one, you can run them in parallel from a tooling perspective, but equally important that you also designed your tests in a way that you can run them in parallel. We see this very often where tests were not designed with running in parallel in mind, and the moment you then run in parallel, basically the whole thing explodes and you have to rework and refactor all of your tests. Continuous integration and delivery. Last but not least, here, what that gives you is fast and frequent feedback. You make a change in the code base, or your developer makes a change in the code base, and you immediately get that feedback. Did I break something, or is everything still okay? Super important, because what you don't want is you write some code and 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 2 months down the line, you realize, oh, there is a problem. But in the meantime, there have been many, many other layers of technology and code and stuff put on top. So it becomes very hard to debug, of course. Right? Continuous integration gives you that instant and fast, frequent feedback. Good. Conclusion. Well, there's no magic recipe to enterprise testing. What I tried to get across in the last 15 minutes was just the 5 things that we see that should be really thought through in an enterprise environment, or also, of course, if you're really starting to scale out your test automation efforts. This can also be in a small startup where you just have a few tests and you say, okay, we now heavily invest into test automation, we scale out our tests. These are the things that you should really think about, and that will make your life easier. Of course, there's many other things to consider, but that won't fit into a 15-minute time slot. Anyway, thank you very much for having me. If you are interested in hearing more, please do reach out. I can be reached here. Yeah, and have fun at the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.